is love. All you need is love. Love is all you need.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video I will be giving my review of the Friday of the 2019 Love Never Fails convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. For those of you who don't know, these conventions happen on a yearly basis. They're normally, or they're always in fact, 3 days long, and especially in recent years there's been more of a focus on showing video material to witnesses in the audience during these events. So in this video I'm going to be taking a look at that video material and one or two clips of the actual talks where these videos are presented. Now we have a lot of footage to get through, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip. This is the start of the morning session on the Friday, the very beginning of the convention. So the idea is that this music video is playing to signal the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses need to take their seats and be ready for the talks to begin. That's the whole point of what we've been looking at. For the most part, I can skip these music videos in my commentary because they're not really that interesting. In most cases, they seem to be rehashing material from previous conventions and from the JW broadcasting episodes. But I will show them if there's something fairly unique that needs to be addressed. And in this clip, we see quite an obvious example of child indoctrination. The song's being sung in Polish, and during the song you see this family with these two young children basically doing family worship with them and taking them to meetings and raising them to be Jehovah's Witnesses. We're going to return to this whole issue of child indoctrination during the talks themselves, but I thought it was worth mentioning that the convention has barely begun and already we're seeing young minds being hijacked for the furtherance of Watchtower's aims.
Welcome to the Love Never Fails Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. We are so happy that you were able to arrange your affairs to attend all 3 days of this convention. We are sure that it will help you to get to know our loving Heavenly Father better, draw closer to Him, and fortify you for the tests and challenges that we'll face in the coming days. Why were the words at 1 Corinthians 13 verse 8 chosen as the theme for this year's convention? Because there's no other quality that's more important to Jehovah than love.
Yes, love apparently is what it's all about. And as I've already commented on previous videos, it does jar the fact that they've chosen this particular title for their convention, because you can say lots of things about Jehovah's Witnesses, but one thing that you simply cannot say is that this is a loving religion. They show love purely among themselves, and when I say among themselves, I don't even mean just baptize Jehovah's Witnesses. It's not enough to be a baptized Jehovah's Witness in order to experience the love of this organization. You also need to be towing the line. You need to be fulfilling all expectations. You need to be regular in your ministry. You need to be regular in the meetings, and you need to not be transgressing any of the multitude of areas in which this organization insists on micromanaging people's lives. If you do put a foot wrong and you don't correct your step, and it becomes noticeable to others that you're not quite towing the line, you'll find that this love that's being trumpeted about vanishes instantly, and you get labeled bad association.
As used in the scriptures, agape involves more than an emotional response to another person. This word often conveys the meaning of love guided by principle, and it includes devotion to righteousness and sincere concern for the lasting welfare of others. Why, agape can even be shown to total strangers or even enemies. To love people who don't love us back, to love people we don't even like, or to love those who persecute us is a victory, an achievement, a conquest over all our natural inclinations and emotions. It requires moral sense and awareness of duty, principle, and propriety. True Christians are thus trained to show love on purpose, to love at will. Such love is the crowning quality of our Christian personality. Why does the governing body want all of us to comprehend fully what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of the Christ? This comprehension and experience will help us not only to get a fuller appreciation for the love Jehovah and Jesus have for us, but it will also equip us to show love in more ways and to a greater degree than ever before. Such love will identify us as the true disciples of Jesus, allowing us to serve as beacons of light in this dark world. And it will unite us with an unbreakable bond during what will be one of the darkest times in human history, when the coalition of nations called Gog of Magog will attempt to annihilate God's people.
We have there some artwork from the Pure Worship of Jehovah book that was released at the last annual meeting, very vividly showing the Great Tribulation and the world's nations in their situation room monitoring Jehovah's Witnesses on a wall of screens, monitoring Samuel Hurd presenting JW Broadcasting, because this is going to happen apparently. The world's greatest military minds will be scratching their heads trying to figure out how they can engineer the downfall of Jehovah's organization. But what extraordinary imagery to be showing, bearing in mind that there are kids in the audience. You have there the image, for example, of the family in the street with the soldier running past, firing his gun. Terrifying imagery when you are a child and you're being told this is going to happen and we will likely face this scenario. And yet, according to Gerrit Loesch, one of the reasons why witnesses need to attend this convention is so that they can be prepared for this exact scenario. He also makes some remarks there about agape love. Agape is a Greek word, so when you analyze the Greek text of the New Testament, you find that the word love has a number of different original words in the Greek language. One of those is agape, and it's supposedly principled love, which I always found to be a rather odd concept. You have to will yourself to have this particular kind of love. You have to will yourself to love people who you're supposed to be loving, in other words, other Jehovah's Witnesses. But Gerrit Loesch makes the extraordinary claim that this love is extended to non-witnesses, and even, he says, to opposers, to enemies of Jehovah's Witnesses. In other words, people like me, I guess. I'm sorry, I'm getting no love. I can confirm I am getting zero love from any Jehovah's Witnesses. So how they can make this extraordinary claim while at the same time telling witnesses that they ought to be shunning those who don't agree with the organization or stop agreeing with the organization. And in this very convention, we're going to be hearing some very strong language about those who are going to be on the receiving end of God's wrath at Armageddon. It's just extremely disingenuous of Gerrit Loesch to present the organization in this way, as though they have love for everyone, including their opposers, when they manifestly don't.
We love you very much. And the same desire that the Apostle Paul expressed to the congregation in Thessalonica, which we find at 1 Thessalonians 3:12, is also our heartfelt wish for you. May the Lord cause you to increase, yes, to abound in love for one another and for all, just as we do for you.
So that was an extraordinary little bit of footage there in Loesch's concluding comments, and we've actually seen this before. Those of you who've seen my rebuttal to the 2018 annual meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll remember that I reviewed Gerrit Loesch giving part of his life story as part of the annual meeting program, and he actually does the same thing there. He wells up with kind of barely suppressed tears, I guess you could say, when he's recounting part of his story, and he's thinking about his fondness for Jehovah's Witnesses and the organization. And I make the point in that rebuttal that this offers a window, in my view, into just how deluded the governing body members are. It's very tempting when you're on the receiving end of cruelty and abusive kind of shunning practices to just say, oh, well, they know what they're doing. They are sitting in a boardroom somewhere plotting as to how they can make people's lives as miserable as possible. They know it's a lie. They know it's a scam. They just are cynically exploiting people. I don't question the fact that at some level they must know what they're doing. You don't rise that high in the organization without getting a grandstand view of some of the worst things about the religion. Those governing body members will know things about that organization that will probably never see the light of day, that I'll never be able to talk about on this channel because we don't have access to what they know. So they know about the evil of the organization in a way that probably no one else can. But they also believe. I don't think there's any other explanation for the kind of emotional displays that you see here from Gerrit Loesch, both in this convention introduction and in the annual meeting. It's possible, I guess, that you could feign that kind of emotion, but it's hard. It's very hard. And I'm certainly not suggesting that all members of the governing body are the same as Gerrit Loesch in this regard. It's possible that the level of kind of cynicism varies from one governing body member to another. But certainly in the case of Gerrit Loesch, I think that this kind of emotional reaction when he's reading his script and talking about how much he loves Jehovah's Witnesses, there's sincerity there that you just simply cannot wave away. And I believe it stems ultimately from the delusion that he is genuinely part of a select group of men who have been chosen by God to rule his organization on the earth.
I'm building my future with him every step that I take.
So, you gonna talk to any career day people?
I don't think so.
Look, I know you got a part-time job lined up and you're gonna pioneer.
Yeah, so
the video production people are here. I'm sure they have part-time.
yeah, I still don't know.
Look, Dennis, you're good at it. Besides, they do corporate videos. Nothing bad. Come on, just talk to them.
All right, I'll check it out.
I hear you. Eventually, you want to work part-time to pursue other passions.
Oh, well, I'd like to start part-time.
It's doable. But after you're established, after a few years of hard work and dedication to be able to pick your own jobs, And you'll even get to set your own schedule.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, thanks so much for your time.
1 second, before you leave, just so you know, here's what you can make in your first year. My advice, try not to get too caught up in the sacrifice. Think about the payback.
Thanks.
So Dennis has got a lot to think about there. This is actually a video that I've talked about previously. If you've seen my 10 worst videos of the Love Never Fails convention, you'll have seen that I comment on this video already. I'm going to try not to dwell on it too much for that reason. If you want to hear all my thoughts, just watch that video first, probably, before you watch the rest of the rebuttals. Suffice to say, the whole point of this video is to coerce young Jehovah's Witnesses into fearing the concept of a career outside Jehovah's organization. They need to, as far as Watchtower is concerned, be paranoid almost about any kind of job that's going to come between them and pioneering. He's going into this discussion just thinking, yes, but will you let me do part-time? Yes, I know, it's a great job, but will you let me do part-time? Part-time meaning because I know I need to pioneer. I know I need to dedicate 70 hours per month to preaching for Jehovah's Witnesses. So Dennis now has this dilemma of whether he's going to accept this brilliant opportunity or dedicate himself to a life-serving Watchtower.
Money. No. Wealth. Proverbs 23:4-5. Do not wear yourself out to gain wealth. Stop and show understanding. When you cast your eyes on it, it is not there. For it will surely sprout wings like an eagle and fly off into the sky.
Hey, you ready to go?
Yeah, ready.
So, you talked to anybody?
Yeah,
Learn anything good?
I did.
Well, tell me.
Isn't it interesting that when Watchtower is talking about their material resources and their material accomplishments, when they're talking about their new construction projects requiring materials, requiring money, requiring financing, requiring outside contractors, when they're talking about their tours of their new facilities with the latest technology, with all new computer systems, with all new machinery in the printery, all the latest high-tech gear, it's perfectly fine to be talking about material things in that context because it's all benefiting Jehovah's organization. But the minute you start talking about material things in the context of a person, particularly a young person who isn't pulling his weight or is unable to pull his weight because he is not a pioneer for Watchtower, suddenly it's this huge tragedy. As appalled as I am at how young people are being manipulated into casting aside their opportunities in materials such as this, I think in many ways I'm equally appalled at the sheer hypocrisy of Watchtower. If it suits them, material things are great, but when it comes to young people and their ambitions and their needs and their future, this is this huge monster that needs to be demonized.
Do not set your mind on lofty things, but be led along with the lowly things. Romans 12:16.
Alright, I gotta go. Okay, bye. Love you.
Oh, Lena, do you still have your study before the Chinese meeting?
Yeah, Vicky's picking me up after work.
Okay, have fun.
Bye, honey. Enjoy your study. Thanks. Love you. Bye.
You gotta step on over and leave your worries behind. 'Cause when you step
Good morning, Lena.
Oh, good morning.
So sales team dropped the ball and didn't tell us that the clients this morning speak Chinese. You can do this, right?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. Thanks. See you soon.
谢谢你们来了。
希望你们会喜欢我们的桌椅。
好，很好。Nice job, Lena. Well done. Okay.
You wanted to see me?
Lena, come on in.
Thanks.
Great job this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, really well done. And what we saw in there confirmed something that we've been thinking about for a while.
About what?
A TV network wants to do a new reality series.
That's right. In each episode, we do a project for a customer. They want a cast from among our designers and builders, and they need a young person to host. Hello?
Lena, you're our top pick. Listen, this can change your life. We want you to think it over, but we need to know soon.
Sorry, Lena. Vanessa, where are we at with me?
So, just by way of some background, this video and the previous video that we were watching are both being shown in a symposium titled Beware of Trusting in What Fails on the Friday morning of the convention. The previous video was dealing with wealth. This one is dealing with status and fame. And so Lena here, the subject of the video, is being given this opportunity that she's informed this will change your life. And so she's being tempted with an opportunity to be a presenter of a TV show or something like that. We're going to see her envision what this would entail in the next part of the clip. But really, again, what we're seeing is manipulation of young people rather than looking upon opportunities as something that should be seized, something that should be taken advantage of wherever they come, because they don't always come. Young people are being manipulated into spurning these opportunities in favor of serving Watchtower more fully.
Generation of Design, premiering tonight at 8:30 Central. Generation of Design. All new season, tonight at 8:30 Central.
Sorry it didn't work out, Lena. We had to go with a new host this year.
Do not set your mind on lofty things, but be led along with the lowly things.
I could sacrifice all these spiritual things, and I still might not make it in the business world. But even if it did work out, I'd be worse off. Either way, I don't want to give up spiritual things.
Okay, where were we? Lena, this sounds big, right?
It does. And I know this seems quick, but my mind's already set on some big things. So thank you so much, but I just can't do both.
So what an extraordinary video we've just seen. Isn't it interesting that Watchtower's most compelling argument against celebrity, against young people having opportunities that require prominence, require being well known, as in this case, their most compelling argument that they can come up with is, oh, it might be taken away from you. So you shouldn't accept it because probably after the first season, they'll go with a new host, which is what Lena imagines if she were to accept this opportunity. And then she says, and even if it did work out I'd still be worse off. In other words, she'd be worse off because she doesn't get to serve Watchtower. She doesn't get to commit to spending 70 hours per month volunteering to recruit people into the Jehovah's Witness religion. That would apparently, it would make her worse off to not be able to do that. It's just incredible that Watchtower is devoting, well, we see it all the time. I say it's incredible, but we see it all the time in Jehovah's Witness broadcasting episodes. But it's just astonishing the extent to which Watchtower goes after young people. And if you think of all of the resources that they commit in terms of equipment, in terms of the hours put in by their volunteer workforce into creating these highly polished dramatizations, all with the aim of getting in the heads of young people and persuading them that nothing that Satan's system of things has to offer will ever work out, will ever last, will ever give them stability or happiness or fulfillment. Only in Jehovah's organization can they find happiness.
Hey, you ready to go?
Yeah, but where's your car? Are you serious? Your car's busted again. You need a new car, man. Can your parents drive us, or?
Well, they want to study right now. We can walk, they'll meet us there. The bakery's just down the street. We'll pick something up for the Rodenkos.
All right.
Hey, you want some coffee?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Hey.
Hey, can I have 2 coffees and a box of targets? Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Your coffees will be ready in a minute.
I'm just waiting on our drinks. Hey, what are you so into?
Bro, they just released the entire season 2. Let's binge watch this weekend.
Yeah, I don't watch that show anymore. It started getting weird. All the heroes live together in that house and date each other.
Right, but it's about the action scenes. It's not like it shows them having sex.
Order's up. Your coffees are ready.
I'll get it. Here you go.
Thanks, man. Hey, Jake. About the show, here's a scripture that helped me out. Romans 12, verse 2.
Right. That one says, stop being molded by the system of things. But you know I wouldn't do those things.
Yeah, but it also says, be transformed by making your mind over. I honestly felt that that show was making my mind over in the wrong direction.
Okay, but you'd still do what's right.
Sure. But let's say, for example, you're interested in someone. Let's say Vicky.
Maybe.
Well, imagine the two of you start dating. You'd find good ways to get to know each other and see each other in different situations. But if your mind isn't fully made over to Jehovah's way, how far might you go?
Okay. I see your point, but I'm still not convinced it'd trip me up.
Yeah, but it's worth thinking about.
So I've already commented on this particular video again in my 10 worst of the convention. I think it's that bad in terms of the judgmentalism it encourages among Jehovah's Witnesses. It's one thing for you to decide for yourself that a certain TV show isn't for you. That's fine. We all get to make that sort of decision whether we're Jehovah's Witnesses or not. But to then start imposing your opinion on others or guilt-tripping them, which is what we're seeing here, in a coffee shop of all places, looking up scriptures on your phone and putting these scriptures in your friend's face, again to try and guilt-trip them into thinking that they're doing something awfully wrong just by watching a TV show that might have some kind of immorality in it. It's just a level of judgmentalism that you would never want to see in your friends, and you never feel comfortable being on the receiving end of.
I saw you looking at Dennis.
Please, you and Jake were inseparable.
He's cute and doing pretty good spiritually.
Pretty good or really good?
Let's just say good. Besides, it's not like we're dating. It's just observing.
That's good to hear, girls. You're both still young.
But you can't help notice.
The spirituality or the looks? Hey, Mom. What was the first thing that you noticed about Dad?
Oh, well.
Oh, I wasn't the first one she noticed.
Oh, you have to tell us.
Okay. His name was Tony. And it was definitely looks first.
But then her parents said, you need to look deeper.
Yeah. They definitely gave me a lot to think about. The verse at Proverbs 31:30 had a big impact on me. It says, charm may be false and beauty may be fleeting, but the woman who fears Jehovah will be praised. When I thought about that verse, I realized it applied to me, but it also applied to Tony. Neither of us was looking for the person who fears Jehovah. I tried to think what my life would be like married to somebody who didn't put spiritual things first. And I really didn't like what I saw. So I decided that it was best to end things with Tony. And I started pioneering. And a year later at Pioneer School, I noticed someone else.
You were hard to miss too.
Thanks. Still, it took time.
It did. It really took until we could see ourselves putting Jehovah first, but together.
This is a choice that could either bring laughter or sorrow. And the feelings that start in a youthful heart, they could be gone tomorrow.
So this too makes it into my 10 worst videos for the convention, because again, it's Watchtower involving themselves in the lives of witnesses, particularly in this symposium in the lives of young witnesses. So just to bring you up to speed, we've had wealth, we've had status and fame, we've had human wisdom, which is the coffee shop conversation, and now we're dealing with strength and beauty. And the purpose here is to manipulate young witnesses into believing that someone is only worth dating if they tick all the boxes that Watchtower wants them to tick in terms of their spirituality. Because the main thing one of the main things when the two girls are having this conversation is, oh, well, what's he doing spiritually? That's what it's supposed to be all about. As I said in my previous comments on this video, it's quite conceivable that you could have someone who is doing very well spiritually, who is in fact an elder, and they could still be a really nasty piece of work. To just suggest that because you've managed to work your way through the ranks in the Jehovah's Witness organization, therefore you are a good person, therefore you are someone who it would be worthwhile spending the rest of your life with, is terrible, terrible advice. And that's the kind of advice that's being thrust on young people in this convention.
Faithful servants of Jehovah are not always shielded from injustice. At times, injustice may befall us even at the hands of a fellow believer. Are you in the middle of a trial like that? Actually, your trial gives you a unique opportunity to prove your love for Jehovah. Obviously, our loyal love for our brothers matters to Jehovah. So if you are ever hurt by your spiritual brother, reject the temptation to spread negative talk about him or to hurt him in kind. Do whatever is necessary to restore peace. After all, our brothers are loved by Jehovah. They deserve our loyal love too.
So we've just been hearing from Kenneth Cook, who is the most recent appointment to the governing body, and we're now in the dramatic Bible reading. So this is after the symposium that's been manipulating young people, involving itself even in areas of romance and dating. And this is after the song, the midway kind of break in the morning session, and we're now into the dramatic Bible reading, which is basically Jeffrey Jackson reading portions of Genesis, talking about the story of Joseph, as in Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. I guess is the best way of explaining it. It's that story, and Kenneth Cook is the one kind of presenting this segment. So he'll present it and then Jeffrey Jackson will read. And one of the applications that Kenneth Cook makes is that this story of Joseph shows the importance of forgiveness, shows the importance of not holding a grudge, of settling disputes between believers and reaching a resolution and pursuing peace and not making a big deal if there is an issue, if there's some form of, if you're wronged in some way. And the reason why I've selected this footage and included it in my rebuttal is because I think it's a piece in the jigsaw when it comes to explaining the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses that allows child sex abuse to flourish and allows child sex abuse to be covered up. It's not the main thing. It's not this issue on its own. It's just part of this tapestry of confidentiality, of forgiveness, of covering things up. We don't want to make a big deal. We need to view our fellow brother as someone who is worthy of our forgiveness, and we need to move on. We need to move on together, and love is automatic between all believers. That sort of thing, I feel, contributes again to this cultural tapestry that creates a perfect storm for abuse. Because when you do buy into this idea that your fellow believers should automatically be loved and automatically be forgiven if they wrong you in some way, granted, this will be talking more about, small issues, not necessarily serious sin. Witnesses are encouraged to report serious sin to elders. But even in the case where someone is disfellowshipped and later reinstated, or perhaps they don't even get disfellowshipped in the case of child abuse, they might just be reproved. This is the attitude that witnesses are supposed to have. You're supposed to forgive and you're supposed to move on. And I would suggest that it's this exact mindset that contributes towards the epidemic levels of child sex abuse within Jehovah's Witnesses.
Jacob, with about 70 of his family, moves down to Egypt. Pharaoh gives them the land of Goshen to dwell in. For 215 years, Jacob's descendants live in Egypt until the day when all 3 million or more of them pass between the walls of the parted Red Sea and eventually take possession of the Promised Land.
This is actually a factual error, or at least it's an error when you actually read the Bible and read the narrative and understand it. Kenneth Cook, who again is a governing body member, so he's supposed to know these things, he's supposed to know his Bible, and you would think that this script, which I'm presuming has been prepared by the governing body's teaching committee, you would think that it's been fact-checked to at least some degree so that it squares up with what the Bible says. You simply cannot say that all 3 million Israelites who made it through the Red Sea or across the Red Sea then advanced on to the Promised Land and took possession of the Promised Land. That's not what the account says. In actual fact, the 3 million or more Israelites who crossed the Red Sea mostly died in the desert. It was Joshua, Caleb, and some Levites who survived from Egypt all the way to the Promised Land. If you were one of the ones who were crossing the Red Sea, chances were you were going to die in the desert. In fact, just a short while after making it through the Red Sea, you have the golden calf incident where 3,000 Israelites die due to worshipping the golden calf. So straight away, you've lost 3,000 almost immediately after crossing the Red Sea. So it's just extraordinary to me that someone like Kenneth Cook, who's supposed to know his Bible, can make such a clearly wrong claim about all 3 million Israelites making it to the Promised Land.
Imperfect humans may let you down. You may face ridicule or even slander, or you may be treated unjustly. But if you remain loyal, Jehovah will never abandon you. He never forgot Joseph, and he will not forget any of his loyal servants today. Stick close to Jehovah, and he will continue showing loyal love to you.
If you think about it, this is exactly the sort of message you would expect to hear from a narcissist in a toxic relationship. Yes, you may be treated unjustly, but show loyalty. Stick with this. Stay in this relationship. Stay in this toxic relationship where you are being abused.
Now, a second way that we show support for Christ's brothers is by willingly expending our time and financial resources to support the kingdom work. There's so many things that Christ's brothers are able to do because of your voluntary donations. Think about what's happening in the field of new building and renovations of kingdom halls, assembly halls, branch facilities around the world, Warwick, Chelmsford, the Philippines, Argentina, not to mention regional translation offices. And speaking of translation, think of what we have now in jw.org in 975 languages. We have JW Broadcasting in 293 languages, New World Translation in 179 languages. And you think about new initiatives in special metropolitan public witnessing and preaching campaigns. Today marks the beginning of a series of 24 international conventions being held in the largest stadiums around the world, in addition to thousands of three-day regional conventions, many of which are being tied into these international venues. How is it possible for Christ's brothers to accomplish all of this work? There's no ads on the website, no fees, no collection plates, no sales, no fund drives, no telethons, just love. And love never fails.
We have here David Schaefer, who is a governing body helper. He's actually giving the final talk of the Friday morning session, which is Jehovah loves those who love his son. David Schaefer is quite an interesting character because his face is fairly expressionless. But as we see there, he's capable of delivering fairly charismatic talks. It's quite interesting to watch him when he does JW Broadcasting episodes, because even though he is naturally expressionless when he's talking, he kind of has to force smiles, which I think always looks fairly odd. He's not smiling too much here, but he is, again, giving this frantic, breathless monologue about how wonderful the organization is, about how the fact that the websites and the publications are available in all these hundreds of languages proves somehow that this work is being blessed by God, which it manifestly doesn't. It's quite conceivable that an organization that's big enough and has enough free labor supporting its efforts can be wrong, can be actually a manipulative cult. Proves nothing. The fact that there's this many languages only proves that people who are inside the group, including the leadership, take the whole thing very seriously. But what a breathless, kind of frantic, rousing, you could say, speech there. And he's talking about about all of these achievements and saying, oh, we don't have any fund drives. We don't have any collection plates. How do we manage all of this only with love? I think that's a bit disingenuous. Hopefully, enough people who are listening to this or were listening to this when this talk was given will be able to remember the May 2015 JW Broadcasting episode in which Stephen Lett famously put his hands out and said, we've got a shortfall. We're spending more money than we're taking in, and we need you to come to the rescue because of our poor financial planning. I'm sure people will remember that, and it may not be a physical collection plate, but it's certainly a verbal one. It certainly flies in the face of the long tradition in Jehovah's organization of not begging for money, of not soliciting money, of saying the day that the God of the riches and gold can no longer provide for his organization is the day that we're going to shut up shop and stop publishing the Watchtower. That was the attitude that Charles Taze Russell had. It's not the attitude that we see today. And yet, according to David Schaefer, there is no begging. There is no soliciting for funds. All of the money that Watchtower is accumulating for its construction projects and various other initiatives is all purely the product of love.
Throughout my childhood, I didn't receive the love a child should have from his family. I lost my father to alcoholism when I was very young. And then my older brother committed suicide. I had to raise myself. Growing up, I was often beaten, and I saw scenes of horrible violence. As a result, I became a drug addict. This loveless upbringing made me a very violent person, unable to love and trust anyone. I was depressed. I couldn't have a normal, happy life like everyone else.
One night, Joseph came home completely drunk. He set the apartment on fire, and in one night, we lost everything we had. I had been studying the Bible for just a few months when the sister gave me an envelope full of cash. The local congregation wanted to help us buy, well, everything we had lost.
I thought, it's incredible that people who don't even know me can show such deep love and affection. So I met with two brothers that same evening, and I asked them, can God really forgive my sins? They showed me 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 11. At that moment, I realized that I could change. I had found the truth. With Jehovah's help, I was able to give up drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes in 3 months. Today, I'm a very happy man. I have learned to trust people, to become a loving husband and a caring father. Despite my loveless upbringing, Jehovah showed me that love never fails.
So we're now in the Friday afternoon session, and we're in a symposium titled Love Never Fails Despite, and we've just been watching the video from the first talk, which is Love Never Fails Despite a Loveless Upbringing. What disturbs me about this video is it sends this message, which you routinely hear in Watchtower propaganda, that you can't be a good person unless you become a Jehovah's Witness. So the message that witnesses are being given when they watch this video is that if they hadn't been raised as witnesses, or if they hadn't become witnesses, they would probably be drunks, they would probably be burning down their apartments and squandering money and that sort of thing. He even says towards the end there, or he suggests that he wouldn't be a good father and a good husband if he wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, which is quite frankly an insult to pretty much every non-Jehovah's Witness father and every non-Jehovah's Witness husband. As to the money, I mean, she says that she'd been studying with the witnesses for a few months, and though it is fairly unusual for someone who isn't yet baptized to receive such extraordinary generosity, nevertheless, she wouldn't have had that generosity if she hadn't been studying. This was a gift that was given with the assumption that she was on the way to becoming a Jehovah's Witness. In other words, it was charity on condition that she embrace the group's beliefs, which isn't, in my opinion, true charity.
From 92 to 93, I worked in a technical assistance company. After a while, my boss would ask me to lie to the clients, telling them that they would receive new parts, when actually they were refurbished parts. So I said, no way, I wouldn't do that. I said I'd prefer to be fired than to do something that would displease Jehovah. Not only that, but my supervisor was verbally abusive. Sometimes he would throw my lunch in the trash on purpose, just to be mean. Sometime later, my supervisor became very sick. I made the most of the opportunity to witness to him. He said that he had moved from the neighborhood, was studying the Bible, and that the brothers were visiting him at his home. Before he died, he said that he was very happy that he was learning about Jehovah. This showed me that with Jehovah's help, we can keep our integrity and also help others to get to know him.
So we're now in the second part of the symposium, which is dealing with love never fails despite a difficult work environment. And the story here is of a lady who is being asked to be dishonest in her job, and her boss is abusive, and eventually her boss ends up studying with the witnesses and undergoes something of a transformation, albeit he doesn't convert before dying by the sounds of things. But again, this is manipulative material. It's designed to make witnesses paranoid when it comes to worldly people, specifically worldly colleagues at work. Quite clearly, not all worldly work colleagues are going to be abusive in this way. You're not going to get a video released by Watchtower at one of these conventions portraying worldly work colleagues in a positive light and showing all the kindness that you could receive from a work colleague who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. It's a very one-sided, biased portrayal, giving a worst-case scenario that doesn't necessarily reflect what it's like to work with non-Jehovah's Witnesses.
When I started my training as a bank clerk, my being one of Jehovah's Witnesses didn't seem to be a problem initially. Not much later, though, my superior called me in. She told me it actually would be a problem if customers saw me in the ministry and that I should simply stop preaching. I explained to her that I never intended to harm my employer's interests, but to stop preaching, I could not do that. I was still in my employment probation period. 2 weeks later, I was summoned to the Human Resources Department at the bank's headquarters. They politely requested I quit preaching. I should think twice about what was more important to me, my employer's interests or my ministry. I respectfully explained that to me, Jehovah is the most important and that I would continue preaching. My probation period ended. My training continued, and during the rest of my apprenticeship, it was never mentioned again. I am really grateful to Jehovah. It was he who gave me the strength not to compromise.
We're being told the story of Nico, who apparently is in Germany. That's what it says in the caption. And he's describing workplace discrimination on grounds of religion. Your employer in the European Union which has laws governing this sort of thing, is actually not allowed by law to discriminate on grounds of religion. There are various labour laws in place. I know this obviously because I've worked in the European Union in the UK, but the same laws apply throughout the EU. You're simply not allowed as an employer to discriminate on religious grounds. So quite what's happened in this case, whether Nico is exaggerating one or two conversations that took place, I have no idea. I think it's telling that despite these conversations, he continued regardless and nothing came of it, which says something. Even if these conversations did take place, his employer wasn't serious about stripping him of his job for continuing to preach. So yeah, it just doesn't quite add up. And knowing what I know about Watchtower and their ends justifies means thinking when it comes to manipulating people, it wouldn't surprise me if at least elements of this story have been exaggerated. And frankly, even if it turns out that this did really happen, it's a total one-off in the European Union for the reasons that I've discussed. And in that case, you have Watchtower capitalizing on and exploiting a very one-off situation for the purpose of furthering the persecution complex narrative of their propaganda.
Did you see here how Jehovah will help you personally? Here in verse 11, he says, I will instruct you, I will lead you. Jehovah has more wisdom than anyone in the universe, and he's as if grabbing your hand and offering personal help. Have you ever felt like you didn't know what step to take in a situation at school? What decisions will make Jehovah happy? How will it feel around others? How will the teacher respond? In verse 12, it says, your steps will not be hindered. Even if you run, you will not stumble. It means you will be confident enough to make the decisions that make Jehovah happy. And verse 13 explains why it's so important. It says it means your life. Schools may offer scholarships, colleges may offer higher education, status in life, but there is no school in this system that will offer everlasting life. That is a gift Jehovah gives to you because of your great love for him. If you stick to Jehovah and resist the competitive spirit and resist the efforts to push you to compromise in your school environment.
So yes, we're now in the part of the symposium that deals with an ungodly school environment, and I was interested to know what the speaker said here, which is why I went through the whole talk as given at the Atlanta International Convention. And sure enough, you see there young people being coerced to turn their back on higher education because of Watchtower being terrified that young people will learn critical thinking skills that will inevitably lead them away from the indoctrination that they've been raised with. But I did find it interesting where he says, there's no school that can offer you everlasting life. It's quite right that no school offers everlasting life because no one can offer everlasting life. Just because you're offering it doesn't mean you can deliver on it. And if any young person is under the illusion that Watchtower can offer everlasting life or can give any kind of guarantees in that regard, they should really commit to doing some research before they pledge their entire lives to the organization and find out whether the claims made by Watchtower really stand up to close scrutiny.
One day at school, a boy asked me in front of everybody why I don't salute the flag. I had to go up in front of the entire class and give an answer. I was a little scared, but I knew I had to defend Jehovah and his name.
I was in a new school and I wasn't expecting to be pressured to smoke electronic cigarettes or vape. It was really intimidating. I was afraid if I didn't do it, I'd get beat up. But I love Jehovah and his standards, so I knew I needed to take a firm stand.
I remembered from family worship and our practice lessons, the first thing I needed to do was pray to Jehovah. But the only thing I had time to say was, Jehovah, please help me. My personal study and my Bible reading helped me to view Jehovah as a close friend, and my love for him moved me to take a stand.
I quickly found out that just saying no wasn't going to be enough. My stand for Jehovah had to be serious and specific. I needed to rely on him and pray, so I did. But I also realized I needed to do research. I found some Bible principles that really helped me, like not defiling the flesh. So when the pressure to vape came up again, I prayed to Jehovah to give me the right words. He made me calm, and I told them, because of what I've read in the Bible, I choose not to vape. I'm not gonna do it. Don't ask me again.
Jehovah was always with me, and I never ever felt alone. He gave me boldness to talk to many students, and I've started many Bible studies.
Thankfully, the pressure stopped, and the kids seem to really respect me for my stand. This has helped me to trust and rely on Jehovah more than ever. I love Jehovah, and I'm so happy I took a stand for him.
I would stand up for any friend, and I'm glad I stood up for Jehovah, because he's my very best friend I could ever ask for.
So we're still in the symposium item, An Ungodly School Environment, and here we're being shown the testimony or testimonies of two Jehovah's Witness children. One is named Diego, who talks quite proudly of his success in refusing temptation to vape with his school friends, and the other is a girl called Ariel, who describes a situation where she's asked to explain why she doesn't salute the flag. She explains it. It doesn't seem that anything extraordinary happened there. I can fully imagine that sort of scenario happening in a school where you have one student, for whatever reason, doesn't necessarily need to be that they're a Jehovah's Witness, who won't go along with what the class is doing on religious grounds, and rather than just kind of dismiss a question by a fellow student, the teacher says, well, why don't you stand in front of the class and explain it? You can use this as an opportunity to express what your beliefs are. It's kind of, in a way, a free preaching opportunity that the teacher is giving. Certainly the opposite of persecution, if you really think about it. And yet this is apparently a challenging school environment that Ariel is in. What her story really does show is that when young Jehovah's Witnesses go to school, they're not just expected to learn, they're expected to teach. They are told, this is your territory. The congregation doesn't get access to this territory, but you do. So you need to preach to your classmates. And indeed, she describes there having a number of Bible studies with her classmates. So she is using her education to recruit people into a faith that she has been indoctrinated into, rather than being persuaded to join as an adult. And then with Diego, I included this footage in my 10 worst videos, and a few people were commenting how unrealistic it is for a kid to be being pressured to vape. And I don't know much about vaping. I would imagine that it's not the cheapest of practices, especially if you're a school kid who doesn't have a job. It seems unlikely that that you would be getting that kind of pressure at school. But the point I made in my 10 worst video was that this shows an inconsistency in Watchtower's theology, because the whole reason why Diego isn't allowed to vape apparently is because this defiles the flesh, because life is sacred and it's not to be taken for granted. And yet Watchtower has a completely different approach when it comes to blood transfusions. If life is in the balance, due to a dietary restriction in the Bible, they are to refuse a life-saving blood transfusion if necessary and die. How does that show respect for life? How does that show that life is sacred? How does that show that the human body isn't to be defiled?
I've been suffering from a very rare type of cancer since I was 8 years old. I have a tumour growing along my spine next to my heart. It causes heart problems and very violent back pains.
I begged Jehovah not to fall apart. I was going to break down. And before I'd even finished my prayer, I felt a veil of peace and serenity envelop me. Jehovah was holding my hand. I could almost feel him saying, "I'm with you." Experiencing such extreme trials allowed me really to taste Jehovah's undeserved kindness. And that's wonderful.
There are a lot of things I'd like to do, but I am unable to because of my sickness. I've had many feelings since my childhood. Frustration, anger, even denial. But Jehovah really helped me accept my situation. My parents always taught me to cherish my relationship with Jehovah. Today, I just need to know that Jehovah loves me. When I don't feel well, I pray to him very intensely for very precise things. Each time, he answers my prayer.
Matteo started to pioneer when he was 14. We, his parents, along with his brother, his sister and his friends thought, if Matteo, who has cancer, can be a regular pioneer, then we should also do it.
Today, the most precious blessing is to see that Jehovah is always there for me, constantly, and I know he will never let me down. His undeserved kindness is sufficient for me.
So we're now in the next part of the symposium, which has the theme Love Never Fails Despite Chronic Health Problems. And we're being shown the story of Matteo in France, who is a cancer patient. He's dealing with a tumour. And there's two things that kind of stood out for me here. There's the part where his mother describes praying and says that once she prayed, she had a feeling of calmness and serenity take over. And it just struck me that you can guarantee that exactly the same thing is being said by people, by believers of other religions. You could interview Mormons, you could interview Pentecostals, you could interview Seventh-day Adventists, and you're bound to find exactly the same stories where people say, oh, I prayed and I had this feeling of calmness and serenity take over. And yet if a Jehovah's Witness were watching that kind of testimony from someone of another faith, let's say a Catholic, they're going to say, oh, well, that was probably the demons. That was probably something else. It was probably any number of things other than actually God giving this person serenity. I found that interesting. And I also frankly think it's sad that Matteo is, well, they're talking about how he's a pioneer and about how his pioneer service in his congregation motivated other people to start pioneering. And I just think it's tragic that young people in this situation are basically not exempt from the requirement to do everything they can for Watchtower. Because let's not forget, pioneering involves committing to 70 hours of preaching per month. I don't know to what extent Matteo's condition is terminal, but if your time on this planet is limited, the last thing you should be doing is wasting significant chunks of that time recruiting people into a cult.
Every year we organize more than 150 regional conventions in our branch territory. Some convention locations are 50 kilometers or more away from the local congregations, and the families are poor. Sometimes families have to walk for 2 or more days to reach the convention location. Generally, the convention committee will request local elders to ask families who live in the town where the convention is organized if they can accommodate brothers and sisters coming for the convention. But the problem is that these families are poor too. Even in that poverty, they are willing to give everything they have.
I host brothers who come for the convention. I will sell one of my pigs or chickens, and with that money, we can all have something to eat. I know Jehovah is a generous God. I also want to show that love for those who draw close to Him.
So we're now in the next part of the symposium titled Love Never Fails Despite Poverty. And when hearing this story of this sweet witness gentleman talking about how he extends hospitality to people who are traveling, I think, 2 days on foot to a convention, even though he is of very little means, he's willing to slaughter a pig or something so that he has food or he has resources to extend hospitality. And listening to this story, first of all, there are lots of people who live in this sort of poverty around the world. I forget what the percentage is of people who live on $1 a day or less. But this is the kind of poverty that we're dealing with here. And it's precisely in these developing countries, due to, in my view, limited access to the internet, that cults like Watchtower are able to get a real foothold. It's these developing countries that are really driving the meager growth, which again is 1.4% for both 2017 and 2018. They're driving this meager growth because of how desperate their plight is, because of how hard it is to get access to outside information when it comes to groups like Jehovah's Witnesses. And hearing this story, hearing about this kind of sacrifice, not just of the hospitality, but also of people going to extraordinary lengths to make it to conventions, it just all reminded me of this chap and his his little jaunt to Bottle King on a Sunday morning to pick up nearly a grand's worth of expensive single malt. Isn't it interesting the disparity between how the leaders live and how their followers live in other parts of the world?
We never had the desire to immigrate. We'd rather have stayed in Angola.
There's a big difference between the African and European culture. When we arrived in France, we quickly saw the danger we could face.
It was easier to have a spiritual routine in Angola. Many things can distract us from our spiritual routine today. If we're not careful, modern technology can draw us away from Jehovah.
So this too was in the symposium item on poverty, and it's talking about a couple from Angola who moved to France, I believe. And they're here saying that moving to a developed country posed problems because there were more distractions. It was easier with the internet and television and what have you to lose your spiritual routine and to get distracted from things like family worship and preparing for the meetings and that sort of thing. And it just reminded me of something that I've said before in my videos, but it's probably worth repeating. If it's really the truth, you shouldn't need to constantly be reminding yourself of it, whether through meeting preparation or personal study or family worship. It should just make sense and you remember it. If it's true, if it's verifiable, you don't need the constant repetition. In just the same way as when you go to college and university and you learn about physics or biology or chemistry, You don't need to keep going back to university year after year after year for the rest of your life. It's just true and it sticks. It's only when we're dealing with total nonsense that cannot be verified, that is completely unproven, that is purely man-made, only then do you need this sort of repetition. And that's why Watchtower is paranoid about the internet and TV and university and college distracting people from their indoctrination, because it will distract them, because their indoctrination is nonsense.
Family. When we hear that word, emotions well up inside of us. Each of us love our families, and we want the best for our families. As we stop and think about Jesus' words that are recorded in the Bible book of Matthew and chapter 10 and verse 36, as true servants of Jehovah today, we also realize that difficulty can come from family members. In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 36, Jesus said, "A man's enemies will be those of his own household." Yes, unbelieving family members can break the peace within a Christian household. No doubt these individuals may not agree with our beliefs. They may accuse us of dividing the family. They may even threaten to disown us if we do not give up the faith. Dear friends, if you are coping with unbelieving family members today, we warmly commend you for your love and your endurance that you're putting up with. No doubt, we're helped to appreciate that your love is one of loyalty to our God Jehovah. We're helped to appreciate how you continue to show your love and is blessed by our Heavenly Father Jehovah.
So we're now in the final part of the Love Never Fails Despite Symposium, and as you can tell, we're now dealing with family opposition. So in other words, how do witnesses cope if there are people in their family who aren't believers and who perhaps exert pressure on them due to their faith as Jehovah's Witnesses? And just as you would expect, witnesses are here basically having the whole concept of the family unit picked away at and diminished somewhat, because what comes first and foremost above anything else is the need to stay loyal to the organization. So if family members who aren't believers are getting in the way of that, then they need to stand to one side. I found it very hypocritical when the speaker says that unbelieving family members may threaten to disown us if we do not abandon the faith.
They may even threaten to disown us if we do not give up the faith.
Jehovah's Witnesses are urged to disown apostates if they do abandon the faith. So they're accusing unbelieving family members of doing precisely what they're prepared to do to any Jehovah's Witness who changes their mind. So it's actually quite a disturbing and sad talk to listen to this, because again, it's all about putting Watchtower's needs ahead of the needs of a family and the importance of family relationships.
The first way, it was suggested, is to have empathy for these unbelieving family members. For these unbelieving family members, they may mistakenly believe that you have been tricked or have become part of a cult. When we could see things from their standpoint, we're helped better to understand their feelings. That is the first way, by having empathy. The second way is that the agitation that may come because of these difficulties, we may want to speak abusively to them, but instead, we're encouraged to speak with mildness. Let our words always be gracious, seasoned with salt. The third suggestion that was given in that Watchtower was to maintain our conduct fine. And it made this point that our conduct can speak even louder than our words. Isn't that so true? So we would always want to show by our conduct that we're displaying this love for our unbelieving family members and others. There was a fourth suggestion that was given that we're helped to appreciate. When you're dealing with family difficulties with an unbelieving relative, plan ahead. Anticipate where that there might be a situation that could lead to a conflict, and then be determined as to how you would address that conflict. And as you show love in these situations, no doubt Jehovah will bless your efforts.
So I found these comments interesting. It seems that Watchtower is very mindful of the fact that as their reputation worsens, it's going to be easier and easier for, first of all, unbelieving family members to be alert to the seriousness of the plight of a Jehovah's Witness relative, to understand that they are, in fact, in a cult. And I was fascinated to hear him use that word, cult, in his comments. And inevitably, there are going to be conversations. If an unbelieving family member, for example, watches the Leah Remini Aftermath show, or watches, for example, the recent Amber Scorer interview on Trevor Noah's Daily Show, the alarm bells will understandably start ringing, and they'll think, gosh, I need to do something here. I need to reach out to my loved one because they're trapped in something. They're trapped in something that's exploiting them. And actually, my advice to someone in that situation would be not too dissimilar to this speaker's advice, albeit he quite naively assumes that simply by being kind and anticipating confrontation and being mild and what have you, this will convince unbelievers to embrace the Jehovah's Witness religion. My advice would be also to be patient, not to just assume that you can shake someone out of being in a cult, not to assume that by confronting them and bombarding them with questions that you're going to loosen them from their indoctrination, but just simply to, again, apply kindness and patience, be prepared when opportunities present themselves to just kind of calmly ask questions that aren't necessarily aimed in winning a battle, in winning an argument, but purely in understanding their perspective and helping them understand your perspective. I think if both parties show that this is honestly how I feel, this is honestly what I think about your viewpoint, show me how I'm wrong, I think that a lot of progress can be made when there is that level of discourse. So just interesting to see Watchtower almost preparing witnesses here for the very likely possibility that loved ones will be alarmed at the fact that they're in a cult and will try to do something about it.
It is so important for us that we display love at all times. In the following video, please note how a sister coped with family opposition.
I started studying the Bible with Jehovah's Witnesses when I was 14. The moment I realized that God did exist, I was so happy and prayed saying, "I just assumed you didn't exist. Please forgive me." Right away, I told my family that I wouldn't be able to join the Christmas and birthday parties we cherished. My mother called all our relatives and spoke to them in tears as she told them that her daughter had joined a terrible religion. She even told my study conductor to give back her daughter. She felt like I was taken from her.
And this is quite an understandable reaction in that scenario. If you are a parent and your 14-year-old son or daughter gets roped into a cult, you're going to be terrified about it. You're going to be distraught, and you're going to be speaking to other family members and friends and trying to get some kind of solidarity and some kind of advice from them. Again, Watchtower seems almost proud of the fact that they're doing this to families. In this case, preying on minors, presumably through a school friend. That's the only way I can think of a 14-year-old getting ropes into the movement. And they're preparing Jehovah's Witnesses for the fact that, particularly in the case of young recruits, which I think would be very rare, but they're preparing Jehovah's Witnesses for the fact that there will be backlash increasingly as their reputation nosedives.
At times, I felt as if I was doing something wrong. But then, I knew that if I compromised, Jehovah would be sad. Jehovah had kindly let me know the truth. I strongly felt that in order to please him, I should not give up. It would have been easy if I had given up then, yet I knew that if I did, I wouldn't be able to draw my parents to the truth. I knew I could get emotional if I tried to talk with them face to face, so I wrote them letters instead. I prayed and kept telling my mother how much I appreciated her. Gradually, she realized that she hadn't lost her daughter, and she was relieved. Now, someone is calling on her, and we have a very peaceful and pleasant relationship.
What a beautiful video of unfailing love, continuing to do things the way that Jehovah wants us to do it.
And isn't that what it's all about? Doing things the way Jehovah wants, or specifically Jehovah's organization wants, not necessarily in a way that benefits you or benefits your loved ones. But I think what we've seen here in this story is basically resignation. This girl's mother realized that she'd basically lost her daughter to a cult. There wasn't really anything she could do to help her daughter understand that. The best that she could do was just make the best of a bad situation, be kind, be supportive, and just be there in case her daughter ever realized by herself that she was being exploited. They describe here the fact that the mother is being called on. I assume that means that witnesses are visiting and leaving magazines, which doesn't really mean much. If she was having a Bible study, that would be one thing, but the fact that she's receiving literature tells me more than anything that she wants to be in the loop. She wants to know what indoctrination her daughter is receiving, again possibly with the aim of being in a stronger position to help her if the time comes. But interesting how almost any suggestion that she might become a Jehovah's Witness is pounced upon as evidence that if you follow the advice in this convention, you will win your relatives over.
The Bible does not describe exactly how Jehovah formed the earth. Jehovah ensured that earth contains all of the elements needed for life. When I see your heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have prepared, what is mortal man that you keep him in mind, and a son of man that you take care of him?
So we're now into the second half of the Friday afternoon session, and we're in a symposium titled Creation Reveals Jehovah's Love. The video that you've just been watching, or you've been watching part of a video about the heavens. Honestly, I'm going to skip through much of this symposium because, frankly, well, here's how the videos go. They basically show nature, or they show, in this case, the earth, or they show animals, or they show marvels of the human body and then quote a scripture and basically say, isn't it marvelous that Jehovah's done this for us? Isn't this even more reason to worship him in the way that Watchtower tells us to worship him? That's pretty much how this whole symposium goes. There's no real science in it. There's no even real efforts to refute evolution. They simply just talk about creation and how wonderful creation is, and how, again, it speaks to how wonderful God is.
Psalm 37:29. The righteous will possess the earth, and they will live forever on it. Now, this text was written after man had sinned and imperfection set in on the earth. And yet God says that the righteous will live forever on the earth. How can we be sure that God's purpose will not change? Because he tells us so. In Numbers 23:19, he tells us that what he determines he will carry out. So Jehovah will get at the root of the problem that we have. But how is he going to do that? Well, what would you do if you discovered that your house was infected with vermin? Would you burn your house down? No, you'll preserve your house. You need it. But you'll get rid of your problem. You'll get rid of the vermin. Many humans have failed to show appreciation and respect for God's gift of the earth. They've created the problem we have. They overload his systems with toxic matter, radioactive waste, undegradable materials, and so forth. In fact, I was just reading this past week that they went down to the very deepest parts of the Mariana Trench. That's the lowest part on the earth, miles below the surface of the waters, and they discovered garbage there. Plastic bags, empty cans, wrappers. Because led by greed and selfishness, mankind has upset the balance in nature. And Jehovah has vowed to remove, to destroy, to bring to an end those ruining the earth. It states it plainly in Revelation 11:18. And he's going to do it before it's too late. He will not allow man to damage the earth so much that it will be impossible to repair it.
So this is the second part of the Creation Reveals Jehovah's Love Symposium. The first part being the heavens, the second part being the earth, and then you have plants, animals, and the human body. I've already talked about these comments in a video that I actually uploaded yesterday. But yeah, fascinating rhetoric there. I've had one or two people kind of defending the comments, saying, oh, he's not talking about all unbelievers. He's not talking about all non-Jehovah's Witnesses. He's just talking about governments and scientists. Or he's just talking about those directly responsible for environmental pollution as the vermin that need to be eradicated. I think that's being extremely generous. I think that in the context of Jehovah's Witness theology and the remarks leading up to that vermin comment, it's very obvious that he's basically saying that the problem with our planet is not the planet itself, but it's those inhabiting it. So we basically need to get rid of the population apart from Jehovah's Witnesses. That seems fairly clear to me, and I think to most of you who've seen the clip. I won't repeat myself too much. I do find it fascinating that he seems to imagine that there isn't a single gram of plastic in our oceans that has passed through the hands of a Jehovah's Witness. I don't know how he can possibly know that. I do find it interesting that he's suggesting here that those who are somehow responsible for plastic finding its way into the oceans are worthy of the death penalty. And don't get me wrong, I am as appalled by the plastic in our oceans as anyone else. But I think that those who are responsible for doing this should first be fined, or even worst case scenario, do some community service or jail time. Execution seems a little bit extreme to me. But it's just this sort of nonsense and and doomsday, judgmental rhetoric that you would expect from, in this case, a Bethelite who has been basically, he spent his life, it seems, in an echo chamber of hatred and judgmentalism and assuming that he and his associates are better than non-believers. It's just the sort of rhetoric that you would expect, but what's different is that nowadays we have these sorts of comments captured on HD video, which we didn't have just a few years back. So again, Watchtower seems to be in many ways architects of their own misfortune.
We taste, see, smell, touch, and hear in one enjoyable experience. All the senses converging in one place, our brain. Some 200 billion nerve cells connected by trillions of tiny contacts. The brain interprets chemical signals from each sense, connects new information to what we already know, and stores lasting memories. Life is a precious gift from our loving Creator.
Again, if life is such a wonderful gift from our Creator and something that should be cherished, why are witnesses so willing to throw that life away rather than accept a blood transfusion?
When serious sins are involved, the discipline that Jehovah God directs may seem more grievous, but discipline that corrects a wrong course that would cause us or a loved one to lose God's favor is discipline that is worth receiving and accepting and appreciating. So those whom Jehovah loves, he disciplines. And sometimes that discipline is a discipline that involves severity. Our God requires that an unrepentant wrongdoer be expelled from the congregation. And he also expects that the same person who had been expelled from the congregation, if he turns around and starts applying the direction of God's word, then that one should be accepted back into the congregation.
So we're now in Friday's penultimate talk. This has the theme, Those Whom Jehovah Loves, He Disciplines. And we're listening to Leon Weaver, who is a governing body helper. And also, as far as I can tell, he's the president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York, so the New York Corporation. And the reason I mention that is because, without wanting to be too unkind, if you were to watch his whole talk, it's quite cringeworthy how bad his presentation style is. I think a lot of it seems to be, again, without being too unkind, a lot of it seems to be down to advanced age. He's clearly struggling to read his notes in anything approaching an extemporaneous way. And yet it seems that he's been given this talk, this assignment, purely because of rank. And we see that time and time again when it comes to JW broadcasting presenters, for example, and those that Watchtower is kind of putting front center. It doesn't matter what their speaking and teaching ability is like. It could be almost non-existent. What matters is what rank they've ascended to in the organization. And we see that very clearly here. But I've also chosen this clip in particular because this is the closest thing we've got so far in this convention to a talk that is promoting shunning. And what's particularly distasteful is that it's saying there that those who are on the receiving end of Jehovah's discipline should be appreciative of it, even though this is a form of abuse, ostracism, the breaking apart of families. It's basically using family relationships and weaponizing them for Watchtower's benefit. And yet this is apparently something that we ought to be grateful for.
So when Jehovah administers discipline, it's an expression of his perfect love. He always knows the proper degree and the method of correction that's best for us. And it's remarkable what has happened to some in the congregation who were disciplined with severity. I'd like you to notice in the following video and see how the discipline that one brother received turned a grievous situation into a real blessing. Now let's all learn from it.
I was raised in the truth and had good spiritual examples in my family that helped me to set goals at a young age. Progressed to baptism in my teen years, also started regular pioneering as a teenager. But I started hanging around the wrong crowd, inside the congregation first and then bad association outside. Partying, heavy drinking, living a double life. I knew I couldn't continue that and stay at home because my parents were still serving Jehovah faithfully, so I decided to move out and go into the world 100% because I just wanted to have fun. Well, with nothing holding me back, the party and the heavy drinking led to experimenting with drugs, living an immoral lifestyle. The lifestyle in the world was pretty much work all week to party on the weekend, and that's what we did. But eventually saw that was just a vicious cycle. Eventually, things got to the point where I started having money problems, losing work, lost my license at one point, lost my apartment, couldn't pay the rent. And so I knew this was not the way to true happiness, and I was miserable.
The message that's given here is that if you do become independent, if you do, you could say, pursue independence from your mum and dad's religion, the Jehovah's Witness religion, terrible things are going to befall you. And to a large extent, that's true, because Jehovah's Witness children are raised in a very sheltered environment where they're kind of isolated from Satan's system of things, and they're taught to distrust it, and they're very naive about how the world works because they don't have any interaction with it. So it's kind of inevitable in a way that when teenage Jehovah's Witnesses do break free, do rebel against their parents, there's going to be problems. And so it's no surprises that would happen. But again, it's more to do with the fact that it's a very isolated group, and children who leave, not only are they unprepared in terms of not having had any exposure, but especially if they're disfellowshipped, they have to fend for themselves while being deprived of normal contact with their family members. So it's kind of, I would say, dishonest the way Watchtower is pointing to this guy's story and saying, oh, look what evil, look what terrible things befall someone who rebels against his Jehovah's Witness parents, when in fact they are the architects to some degree of this guy's downfall. But I also want to point out some of what Leon Weaver is saying in his comments. He said earlier regarding Jehovah's discipline,
He always knows the proper degree and the method of correction that's best for us.
So the statement is made there that when Jehovah disciplines one of his servants, in other words, when a Jehovah's Witness receives discipline through the congregation, it's always to the proper degree.
The proper degree and the method of correction.
And yet I want you to look out for some words that are spoken in the next talk that directly contradict that admit that there will be times when there is a miscarriage of justice and Jehovah's Witnesses just have to go along with it anyway. So I want you to remember those words from Leon Weaver.
I thought back to the time I was the happiest, and that's when I was serving Jehovah full time. And I wanted that back. So I poured my heart out to Jehovah in prayer and let him know that I wanted to return to him. I knew from personal experience that if you break a bone, such as your arm, you need help. You need to see a doctor. Only they are qualified to fix it, set the bone right so it can heal. I knew I had to seek out the elders because they're trained spiritual doctors. They know how to use the scriptures to help you heal. So I went to them because I wanted to return to Jehovah. I didn't even have dress clothes anymore. I'd lost all that. Just went back in jeans and a t-shirt. My parents didn't even know I was coming, but I showed up at the meeting anyway. The elders, when I met with them, they were so loving and kind and patient. I've learned firsthand that Jehovah's discipline, it's for the best. Yeah, it's true, it may hurt, it may sting initially, but if we allow ourselves to be molded and trained by it, it'll always work out for the best. I'm so glad I made the decision to return to Jehovah. Jehovah, He blessed me with the happiness that I longed for, but a lot more. Yeah, privileges of service I never would have imagined. And I've experienced through Jehovah's discipline His greatest quality, love. And I've never been happier.
I know all of you, dear brothers, reacted the same way I reacted when I saw that video. Certainly, good can come when we respond to Jehovah's discipline, even if it's to the severe degree that Ken and here experience. But what can it result in? It can result in benefit to us. Jehovah's admonition and discipline can teach us how to live together. His fatherly care is really evidence, dear brothers and sisters, of Jehovah's love, a love that never fails.
A love that will fail instantly the moment someone stops sufficiently following the Jehovah's Witness religion. There's a lot that I could go on in that testimony. It's so frustrating to see Watchtower attempting to normalize shunning and disfellowshipping and justify it and make out that it's just this wonderful provision of love that always corrects, always has a happy ending. Just because this guy had a happy ending, everyone who gets shunned will have their own happy ending. That's simply not how it works. And I found it quite sickening when the guy whose testimony this is says, if we allow ourselves to be molded by the discipline and guided, I think molded and guided, it will always work out for the best. Well, I am frequently encountering examples of where it doesn't work out for the best, of where someone who is being shunned, someone who simply cannot handle ostracism by their loved ones because human beings aren't built to handle it. Psychologically, it's torture for a human being to have someone that they love, someone that matters to them, turn their back on them. And we hear time after time that this eventuates in the person committing suicide. So just how exactly has it worked out best in those scenarios? Now, though, it's time for the final talk of the Friday session, and it's going to be delivered by a familiar face.
This is our first convention of 9 conventions this year. We actually have 2 more international conventions. We have one in Denmark and then in Korea. And we have 6 regional conventions. So 9 conventions. The bad news, you're the first convention. I have to practice my talks on you. But it's like every surgeon, he has to have his first patient. Thank you for being the first patient. But it... It is a great pleasure to bring you the love, the affection of the United States Bethel family, as well as the 8 members of the governing body. The governing body loves you very much.
Yeah, I'm not seeing all that much sincerity when he says the governing body loves you very much, but he could say it in any way, shape, or form, and he's still going to get rapturous applause at these conventions, let's face it. But I've included this clip because I think it perfectly demonstrates the arrogance and the vanity. I've referred to Stephen Lett's, well, I think the phrase that I've used before is vanity humor. We see it quite a bit with him. We saw a few examples of it at the 2018 annual meeting where he was telling jokes that basically were further distinguishing him or further making it clear how powerful and important he is. And here the joke is, oh, I've got all these conventions I need to go to, and you guys are the first convention, so you guys are the guinea pigs. You know, it's not really funny. It's just him reminding, in sort of a goofy way, his audience that he's important, he's a big shot, and he's got lots of conventions to give the same material at. So again, quite an interesting example of this kind of vanity humor on display.
Now, what was the second facet of love we mentioned there in Colossians 3:12? Kindness. The quality the quality of taking an active interest in the welfare of others. Friendly, helpful acts of favors. One brother of the governing body used to say, if you're in doubt as to what to do the kind thing. You'll always do the right thing. And we certainly want to do that in our family. Be kind. Our congregation, out in the ministry, the workplace, school, the neighborhood. If we're wearing kindness, we're always well dressed.
Wouldn't it be fantastic if the governing body could take their own advice to heart and implement it? Wouldn't it be nice if we could see some kindness from Stephen and his colleagues when it comes to re-examining shunning, which, let's face it, the current shunning laws have only been in place since the September 15th, 1981 Watchtower article, which made disfellowshipping and disassociation the same. Before that, it was possible to, at least in theory, to leave gracefully. You could disassociate and still have contact with family members who are Jehovah's Witnesses. But in September 15th, 1981 Watchtower, that door slammed shut, and this supposedly was a kind provision, weaponizing people's families against them as a means of control, as a means of crushing any kind of dissent against the governing body's authority. So if you're looking for hypocrisy in this year's convention, here's a pretty good example.
Well, how can we show we're clothed with humility? Now, here's some examples. Let's say the elders make a decision that we don't understand, or we don't even agree with what they've decided. See, for example, someone we really love loses a cherished privilege of service, or a beloved son or daughter is disfellowshipped. Now, how is humility going to help us in that situation? Well, first, it will move us to acknowledge that we do not have all the facts. No matter how much we think we know about a situation, see, only Jehovah has all the facts. Only He can read hearts. See, we don't have all the facts. We're kind of like, you want to think of this illustration, looking through a keyhole into a large room. See, a view through a little keyhole, your view is very limited of what's in that large room. See, only Jehovah sees everything. So humility will help us acknowledge that. Secondly, even if there happens to be, in a rare case, a true injustice, humility will move us to be submissive and patient. Wait on Jehovah to correct that injustice if that truly is the case. So obviously humility is going to help us.
First of all, I don't think that this man is in any position whatsoever to be lecturing anyone on the subject of humility. Here is a man who literally thinks that he is one of only 8 human beings on the planet who are spokespersons for the creator of the universe. And this is apparently a humble man. This is a humble man who punishes people who disagree with him, who punishes Jehovah's Witnesses who change their minds about his authority by arranging for them to be estranged from their families. And we're supposed to sit back and be lectured by him on humility. I think what he means by humility is basically just rolling over and doing whatever the elders say or following whatever decision the elders make. I think that's his version of humility. Humility, very conveniently for him, means acknowledging his authority and the authority of the goons that he and his colleagues have put in power on their behalf on a congregation level. That's what he's really talking about when he's talking about humility. But you will remember in the previous talk, in Leon Weaver's talk, I mentioned that there's a disparity because Leon Weaver assured his audience that God always knows the proper degree.
He always knows the proper degree and the method of correction that's best for us.
God always knows the proper degree, always has it figured out. And yet here Stephen Lett is admitting that there will be almost inevitably injustices from time to time. There will be miscarriages of justice. And what's his remedy? What's his suggestion for when that happens? Oh, just roll with it. Just go along with it.
Even if there happens to be, in a rare case, a true injustice, humility will move us to be submissive and patient. Wait on Jehovah to correct that injustice if that truly is the case.
Of course, you can have a miscarriage of justice that results in someone committing suicide. And so how does that get rectified exactly? So it's just really shocking to see the arrogance and the narcissism and the hypocrisy of this man. For the most part, I've been willing, or I try to extend the benefit of the doubt with Stephen. I think he's mostly just a rather intellectually challenged, you could say, member of the governing body who's rather quirky, or at least he gives that impression. But I think underneath this quirkiness and underneath this kind of theatrical side, there's a really arrogant, really hypocritical streak. And we're just seeing parts of that surface in this talk.
Another way it will certainly help us, it will move us to not insist that things be done our way. See, we're willing to do things someone else's way. We don't fight for our rights. We're more concerned with our duties, our responsibilities. For example, when it comes to dress and grooming, some say, it's my hair, my clothes, I have the right to dress and groom any way I want to. It's my right. Well, you may have the right, but what does 1 Corinthians 10:23 say? All things are lawful, but not all things are advantageous. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. So what that's saying is, even if you have the right to do something, if it's not advantageous, if it doesn't build up, then don't do it. The Apostle Paul said he wouldn't even eat meat if it stumbled his brother. Now, he could have said, I like meat, I'm going to eat meat, they'll just have to get used to it. No, he had humility.
I'm just reminded of all of those talks that I would sit through as a young Jehovah's Witness, where they would be talking about the Gospels, about Jesus' life and ministry, particularly his exchanges with the Jewish religious leaders. And they would be talking about how unreasonable the Pharisees were, and about how they had a rule for everything, and they were weighing people down with rules for every single aspect of their lives. And Jesus chastised them for doing this because they were essentially creating a fence around the law. It wasn't enough to just obey the law. They also created like an extra fence, an extra perimeter around that law that should never be breached, so that no one got even close to breaking the law. And then you compare that with what he's just saying there now, where he's saying, yeah, you think you've got rights. I'm telling you differently. You may think you have the right to decide how you dress. But look, there's this verse that says that we get to decide on those things, because all things are lawful, but not all things are advantageous. And guess who gets to decide what things are advantageous or not? We do. And furthermore, if there's anyone in a congregation who takes what we say too seriously, you've got to cater to their conscience rather than worry about whether it's lawful or not. That's how messed up this religion is. And I just hope that if anyone's watching this who's never been a Jehovah's Witness, just dwell on what he's saying there. He is literally saying that you do not have the right in this religion to decide how you dress yourself. That's the level of micromanagement in this religion.
Patience. The dictionary is the ability to remain calm when dealing with a difficult or annoying situation. Who is the greatest example of patience in the universe?
Pretty much everyone who's listening to this talk.
Well, you know, Jehovah. I mean, when Adam and Eve sinned, Satan, the devil, rebelled, Jehovah didn't panic, make hasty decisions, overreact, give up on the human race. No, he has shown patience, hasn't he? For some 6,000 years, for the outworking of his purpose. But Jehovah's patience has resulted in salvation for millions. Isn't that true? If you figure it up, during the last service year, the average number baptized every day, 772. Every day we went to bed at night, got up the next day, on average, 772 new brothers and sisters. Jehovah's patience is resulting in salvation. Now, how can we work in harmony with Jehovah's patience? Well, for one thing, continuing to patiently preach until Jehovah says the work is done. See, waiting on Jehovah, giving others an opportunity to learn the truth, just like Jehovah gave us an opportunity to learn the truth. We don't want the attitude, now that I'm in the truth. See, now I'm in the truth, and I don't want to preach anymore. I don't want to wait. I want the end right now. I want it right now. Now that I'm in here, let's pull up the ladder and get the show on. What are we waiting for? That's a bad attitude, isn't it? No, we patiently preach. We wait on Jehovah. We're working in harmony with his patience.
Okay, so first thing, he talks about the fact that Jehovah's been waiting for 6,000 years since Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to allow the outworking of his purpose. That's the classic language that you always hear as a Jehovah's Witness. Everything is to do with the outworking of God's purpose. And this outworking has apparently lasted for 6,000 years. That's how long it's taking, apparently, for God's purpose to be outworked. It's almost as though he's not there. I mean, what would be the difference? I hate to kind of offend anyone who's religious, who's watching, but why 6,000 years? How would you know the difference if there was no God? If he wasn't actually there? If he was in fact the product of ancient man's imagination? So that's the first thing. The second thing is he talks about this figure of 772 getting baptized every day. This is apparently something that Jehovah's Witnesses need to be proud of. They have 772 getting baptized every day. But Stephen Lett conveniently neglects to mention that these 772 are barely making up for the number who are being disfellowshipped every day, the number who are leaving as a matter of conscience because they can no longer bring themselves to believe this nonsense. So that even with 772 Jehovah's Witnesses getting baptized every day, the actual growth percentage for the last two service years has only ended up at 1.4%. it's barely, those baptisms are barely allowing the organization to have their head above water. And finally, I hope you will have just absorbed the thrust of what Stephen Lett's whole argument here is, which is that every day that these baptisms are being allowed to accrue is a day of God's patience before Armageddon. So if you think about it, implicit in what he's saying is, if you want to survive Armageddon, you'd better get baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. And yet you routinely hear apologists, they come on the channel all the time saying, oh, why do you say that only Jehovah's Witnesses survive Armageddon? It's not as straightforward as that. It's not as black and white. Jehovah can read hearts. No, I'm sorry. It's there for you if you will only listen to what Stephen Lett is saying. He is literally saying that Jehovah is allowing time for more people to become Jehovah's Witnesses so that they will survive Armageddon, because that's the only way through. That is the essence of a doomsday cult.
But now what if there is a matter that's so serious you just can't seem to overlook it? Well, in that rare case, we may need to go and talk the matter out with the individual. But here's 4 suggestions to keep in mind, and we're going to call it the 4 P's. Go and talk first prayerfully. Enlist Jehovah's help to help you with that conversation with this one who's offended you. 2, do it promptly. Don't let the matter fester. 3, do it privately. Don't talk to others. Go talk to that individual. And 4, do it peacefully. Your goal is to gain your brother. In fact, let's look at this dramatization in this video. A sister applies those 4 suggestions.
She said she had forgotten about our invitation. This wasn't the first time. Why does she do this again and again? I said in my heart that I could never forgive her.
Will you forgive her?
Of course I will.
What we're seeing here, for me, is a video about compulsory friendship, which is what friendship, what love is all about in Jehovah's Witnesses. You have to be friends with everyone. You have to have agape, principled love for everyone in your congregation if they're a witness. No matter how antisocial they are, no matter how rude they are, no matter how many times they screw you over and disappoint you and let you down, you must be their friend. Provided they are attending all the meetings and doing everything that's expected of them as Jehovah's Witnesses, provided they're not bad association by failing the organization in any way, shape or form, you must be their friend. And that's actually one of the most liberating things about breaking free from this organization, is that you finally get to decide who your friends are. You don't have to stay friends with someone who's just taking advantage of you or who's routinely letting you down and being selfish and being inconsiderate. Not saying that there isn't scope, of course, for forgiving people when they make mistakes. I mean, we all forget things from time to time. But if someone's routinely doing it, if they just don't show appreciation, if they are taking you for granted, in any normal context, you'd be able to distance yourself. It's not shunning, it's just deciding who your friends are. But in the Jehovah's Witness religion, you've got to patch things up. You've got to make things right, which is what's being described here.
I found what I needed. I knew I would forgive my sister, but the article reminded me how to handle it. 3 points. 1. Promptly. I couldn't wait. I needed to talk with her as soon as she could. 2. I shouldn't talk to others about it. I must do it privately. And 3, peacefully. Rather than accusing her, I should simply express how I feel. And I also need to listen patiently to my sister. I needed to act right away.
Like that dear sister, may all of us be determined to follow those steps so that we preserve the peace with our brothers, and Jehovah's going to view us as an asset in his organization. And he's going to want us in his new world. See, if we preserve this peace in his organization.
I'm pretty sure I don't want a space in Jehovah's new world if the entry price is having to spend every waking moment, every morning, noon, and night, praising the monster who has annihilated 7.5 billion men, women, and children, simply for not acknowledging Stephen Lett's authority and the authority of his colleagues. That's the new world that Stephen Lett expects Jehovah's Witnesses to yearn for, and in which, in fact, they do yearn for. They just don't quite think about it in those terms. They think only of the good side. They don't think about what's buried just a few feet under the manicured lawn. But I mentioned previously in one of the earlier clips how it's not the only factor in the covering up of child sex abuse and the culture that allows child abuse to flourish in Jehovah's Witnesses, but certainly this onus on patching things up, on forgiving your brother, on having a relationship, having a friendship with everyone who makes the cut as a Jehovah's Witness, regardless of whether they're a good person or not. It all contributes, in my view, to the culture that allows child abuse to flourish. And it's disturbing to see this being further promoted in this convention. But this brings us to an end of the first day of the convention, and in the next rebuttal video I will be going into the talks from the Saturday. But I do hope you've enjoyed my rebuttal. Please don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more videos, and as always, thank you so much for watching.
Oh,